The rate is slightly higher than some of the neighboring states. Texas and Mississippi, Georgia, and all of the southern states are fairly high. Louisiana, I think, ranks also high in number of single-family households, single-parent households, in high school dropouts. They're high. Louisiana is high in that. Louisiana is high in drug use and possession, and a number of other factors like that, which contribute to crime. In Rapides Parish, we have a number of programs that we use to try to divert nonviolent first offenders away from the court system, to try to reduce that. But when you have people, if you have someone who brings a kilo of cocaine into Rapides Parish, or who somebody who sexually abuses a 9-year-old child, or who murders their neighbor or something, and if the police build a solid case on that where we have the evidence, I don't make any apology for prosecuting those kind of people to the maximum extent. I think that I don't know what other, perhaps there's some sociological thing you could do to correct that kind of behavior, but I don't personally believe that people who do that kind of activity, which is so serious, that there's any alternative to incarceration. I think there's an element of punishment for very serious crimes. Now, as I told you, we're fortunate in Rapides, in the juvenile system. We were selected among all of the parishes, one of 5, to be a site for the MacArthur Foundation grant for diversion of juveniles for non-serious offenses like skipping school, truancy, and those sorts of things, or mild drug use and that sort of thing. Those kind of juveniles we can better treat and divert them from the juvenile pipeline to prison by getting them proper help and counseling and try to correct the behavior at a young age. But if you have a juvenile who's 14 or 15 years old and they take a handgun and go in and rob somebody in a convenience store and shoot the clerk, those kind of juveniles, I think there's an element of punishment that that the court has to mete out there. So until violent crime and serious drug distribution, until that declines, which depends on some socioeconomic factors, until that declines, I think you're going to see high incarceration rates in Louisiana. Not great to be the first, but people who are in jail, I think Earl Long said one time, they're not in there for ringing the church bells too loud. A lot of times you have people who commit nonviolent crimes like shoplifting and that sort of thing, and the first 2 or 3 times, typically a judge will, even though it's a felony, typically they will give them a probation the first several times, because judges are aware, just like everyone else, of the need not to fill the prison up with nonviolent people. Right. But after the 3rd or 4th or 5th or 6th or 7th occasion, and the conduct is repeated time after time after time, there's a level of frustration and a level among the citizenry saying, look, these people have just escaped punishment, you're not helping. So until there are alternative programs to successfully deal with major behavioral problems, when it repeats 5 or 10 or 15 times, there's not right now a good alternative to incarceration. But as I say, on crimes that are violent crimes where people rape victims, or they sexually abuse young children, or they bring large quantities of drugs in to sell them to make slaves out of young people, I don't have any apology for prosecuting those kind of people to the maximum extent that the facts of the case will allow.
That's what the Pew Research report argued, that nonviolent criminals should be removed from the prisons as much as possible. But I mean, you just spoke to that about, there comes a point where you have to after so many offenses, you have to put them behind bars?
Well, if the alternative programs that are available are not working, at some point a judge becomes frustrated, and sometimes a judge feels like he's got to get their attention by putting them in jail for at least some period of time. And whether it's drug possession, after the third, we have a drug court program here. We have a grant, and Judge Rando is the drug court judge right now. It was initially started by Judge Yeager, and that program seeks to rehabilitate through the court system and counseling and monitoring and that sort of thing, drug testing, for about a 2 or 3 year period, people who have drug addiction problems. And if the program is successful, and about, I think, 60 or 70% do pass the program, the conviction that they got for possession of drugs is wiped off their record. And they're on probation the whole time. They're never put in jail. That program is one of those that is an example of a rehabilitative type program. That's a good program. But that kind of thing costs money for counselors. It costs money for probation officers to call on people every 2 or 3 times a week to be sure that they're not out there doing drugs and committing other crimes, stealing things to pay for their drug habit. So that's an example of a program that has some success. And if probation and parole can be funded at a substantially higher level so that these probation officers don't have 100 or 200 or 300 people each to supervise, where they can keep tabs and go by and do home visits and do drug testing on probationers, that may work. And that may be an alternative. But until that happens, there's a rate of recidivism right now in people who are committed to jail in the DOC system, the Department of Corrections system, that's the state system, for serious crimes. Once they're released, within 5 years, 55 to 65% will be back in the prison system. They don't even make their full parole time, and they're given an alternative. And of course, you can argue, well, they should have more aftercare. When they're released on parole, they ought to have job training so that they can do something other than sell drugs or steal things or whatever. And that's a great argument. But until those systems are in place, there's no alternative at this point to increase incarceration. I mean, the citizens who are law-abiding citizens demand that, and they're entitled to it. They're entitled not to have their homes broken into or their children abused. Public safety is an important thing to think about.
Is it the drug problem? I mean, is that the sole? I mean, not the sole problem, obviously, but is that the biggest contributing factor to the high rate of incarceration?
In my estimation, which is basically just practical experience, I'm not a sociologist or criminologist, but I see a lot of cases that come across my desk, a lot of files. When you read these files, I would judge that more than 2/3 of all crime, whether it be violent crime or property crime like theft or burglary or something, is related in some way to drugs. Either the need to secure money to buy drugs or obtain drugs, or to situations where drug dealers fire at each other over turf disputes, or where drug purchasers won't pay for drugs and they send out people to collect the money, those kinds of things. We have a number of cases, like we have one coming up for trial soon, where it was a drug ripoff. That happens a good little bit, and you have a lot of weapons and drugs together, and the penalties for that are very substantial. The legislature has said that when you fire a weapon in a drug transaction or have a weapon in a drug transaction, those are mandatory penalties, that those people go to jail. So if they're convicted of that, they go to jail. The short answer to your question is that the use of drugs and the overwhelming desire for drugs drives a tremendous amount of crime, And we're seeing more and more of it. It doesn't seem to, despite the best efforts of law enforcement, it does not seem to be subsiding. So I don't know the answer to it. I only have a small piece of the puzzle here, and I'm only responsible for one little aspect of it. But I don't think that, as I say, drug addicts, I have sympathy for them, for their families. I see parents every day whose children, they come in here crying that they can't, their children may not even be arrested yet, but they want advice on how to deal with their children's drug problems, because otherwise good children who have been taught right from wrong, very often they get into this drug business and they start stealing everything they can put their hands on. They don't work or go to school. They're just drifting, rudderless in society. And eventually they get in some kind of pretty serious trouble, or get hurt, or take overdoses and die. So it's an increasing problem, and until the root problem is dealt with, which is the desire to take drugs, until that's dealt with some kind of way, I frankly don't see any real chance at a reduction of the connection between drugs and crime. I don't know the answer to that, but all I know is that when a file comes across here and somebody for the 4th or 5th time has broken into a pharmacy to steal drugs, or has broken into their neighbor's house, or has taken a handgun and robbed some convenience store clerk that's making a minimum wage trying to make a living, I don't have a lot of alternatives if the evidence is there to pursue the case. I mean, that's our job to do it, and we just have to do it in those kind of cases. It doesn't make any difference to me at that point what Louisiana's incarceration rate is. On those kind of cases, I think it's our job to move ahead and to do the best we can to put people in jail.
Okay, all right. Anything else you want to add?
The system needs more resources like anything else. It all comes down to a matter of money. But, you know, higher education needs more money. Healthcare needs more money. The government is, in trying to fulfill the needs of its citizens, is just about at the breaking point. And I don't know the answer to it, but more money in this area, I think, would be helpful if more money were given to programs for drug treatment, the treatment of drug addiction, the supervision of people who are on probation, as opposed to placing them in the prison system. I believe that would be helpful overall. And I'm hoping that studies like this Pew study, will be looked at, and you know, that's up to legislators and governors and people like that to make those decisions. That's above my pay grade. I don't make those kind of choices. But I think that that more resources will help in this area.
All right, thank you.